Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. In the biting chill of a late autumn evening, the fog rolled in thick like a damp veil, suffocating the small town of Eldridge Hollow. Ruth Tanner, weary from a week of sleepless nights, stepped out of her dilapidated car, the engine sputtering, into silence behind her. The sound of her heels clicking against the cracked pavement echoed unnaturally as she walked towards the abandoned house that had belonged to her late grandmother, a place she had inherited but dreaded. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and even as she suppressed the shivers that climbed her spine, an instinctual dread clung to her like a second skin. The roof sagged, tiles peeling under the weight of years, while a chilling wind whispered warnings through broken windows. Ruth pushed the door, which emitted a painful creak as it reluctantly surrendered to her touch. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay, closing in on her like a noxious embrace. Dust, motes danced in the beams of her flashlight, swirling amidst memories she'd hoped to leave buried. This home had been riddled with secrets, none darker than the stories whispered about her grandmother, rumored to have dabbled in things best left untouched. As the night deepened, Ruth rummaged through the scattered remnants of a life once vibrant. A cracked photo frame caught her eye, its face peeling away to reveal a haunting gaze that seemed to follow her every move. It was her grandmother, eyes sunken deep like dark tunnels, and Ruth felt a cold finger of fear trail down her spine. She clutched the frame, an absent warmth blooming in her chest. Her grandmother had always spoken softly of the past, but the shadow of something sinister loomed just beyond the fringes of her tales. A soft thudding noise in the distance pulled her attention away, emanating from the attic above. The sound was unrelenting, a rhythmic echo that pulled her toward the ancient staircase, each step creaking ominously underfoot. Ruth hesitated. Dread seeped through her, saturating her heartbeats with an insistent rhythm that felt almost alive. Curiosity wrestled with paranoia, but the thudding called to her, and against better judgment she ascended into the murky dark. At the top, she was met with an invisible pressure that felt like hands gripping her tight as she reached for the rusty doorknob. The door cracked open, a groan of rusty metal heralding her entry into a space slathered in shadows. The attic was barren except for an old trunk, its edges gnarled by time and covered in a spider's web that pulsed gently with her every breath. The thudding had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that made her skin prickle. Ruth knelt beside the trunk, the floorboards sighing beneath her weight. She pried it open, heart racing at the thought of what cursed relics could lie within. Inside was an array of objects, brittle letters yellowed with age, a dusty music box, and a strangely shaped doll whose features twisted in an unsettling semblance of life. She felt a compulsion to reach for the doll, a magnetic pull that overwhelmed her senses. But as her fingers brushed against it, a chill shot through her veins. Suddenly, the music box sprang to life, an eerie lullaby filling the air as the attic door slammed shut, pinning her in darkness. Ruth's heart thundered in her chest. The melody warped into something sinister, twisting memories of childhood into a nightmare soundtrack. Each note felt like an accusation, shimmering with the specters of her past, the restless souls of ancestors bound to this house, their pain echoing through the centuries. A shadow slithered from the corner of the room, coalescing into a darker mass that danced just beyond her sight. Paralyzing terror gripped Ruth as she realized the shadows in the attic were alive, surging closer. Like whispers writhing through decay, she stumbled backward, her fingers brushing against the music box now lying open beside her. The doll seemed to watch with hollow eyes, its expression shifting from innocence to gnawing sorrow, and she felt its gaze burrowing into her very soul. Desperation surged within her as she lunged for the door, which resisted her like a living thing. Her frantic pounding echoed through the house, an uninvited percussion to the lullaby that continued its deceptive serenade. Just as despair threatened to envelop her, a crack appeared in the darkness, a sliver of light pouring through the door's edge, illuminating symbols carved into the surrounding walls, inscriptions her grandmother had spoken of but never explained. With newfound resolve, Ruth chanted the names inscribed there, words tinged with power and pain. The shadows shrieked, the room convulsed, and the air thickened, swirling like a cyclone as she felt the room fracture around her. The whispers rose into a cacophony, voices entwining with her own, urging her to forget, to abandon the past's haunting grasp. But she resisted, rallying every piece of herself against the tide of despair. With one final cry, she cast her hand toward the doll, feeling a surge of energy as she made contact. The room erupted in blinding light, the shadows drawing back as if retreating from an enemy. For a brief moment the music faltered, then ceased, and in that silence all tension unraveled. The door burst open, flooding the attic with light, and as she stumbled out into the hallway the weight of generations lifted, leaving behind only echoes. Ruth fell to her knees, gasping for breath, the remnants of her grandmother's suffering dissipating like morning fog. Yet still, a sense of hollowness echoed within her chest, a permanent reminder of the battle she had faced. As she turned back to glance one last time at the attic, she caught the shadow of the doll appearing in the corner of her eye, a sinister smile curving its porcelain mouth, a promise that nothing would ever truly be over. Long after she escaped the house, Ruth found herself haunted by the remnants of that night. Odd occurrences plagued her. Soft whispers crept into her thoughts, and every shadow flickered with familiar shapes that danced on the periphery of her vision. She began to question what was real, and whether she had truly left Eldridge Hollow behind. The town lay heavy in her memory, a perpetual dark wave haunting her present. In those quiet moments of solitude, Ruth would hear the lullaby linger softly in the back of her mind, each note a taunt, a reminder of the price of forgetting. And as darkness fell, she realized the music was not just a haunting melody. It was her own heart's rhythm, tethering her to a legacy that she could never escape, the truth that she was now forever part of the shadows she had once fought against. Story 2. On the outskirts of a sprawling, forgotten city, a decrepit church stood alone, swallowed by dense thickets of vines and brambles that seemed to breathe a life of their own. It was a structure long abandoned, its crumbling spires and shattered stained glass looming like gaping maws in the twilight, carrying whispers of an unseen past that clung to the air like damp fog. This was the place where Evelyn, an aspiring journalist searching for her big break, decided to delve into the heart of urban legend. A quest born from a desire for validation and a lingering loneliness that threaded through her life like a ghost itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into shadows and shades of gray, Evelyn felt the first prickle of unease ripple through her. This part of the city was almost forgotten by time. The streets were flanked by skeletal trees draped in cobwebs, and the silence was thick enough to choke on. She had read the articles and heard the stories, tales of strange rituals and echoing cries that haunted the church long after its congregation had abandoned it. Clenching her notebook tightly, she leaned in closer, her heart thudding with a mix of excitement and dread. Inside, the air was heavy, stale, and oppressive. Dust motes danced in the fading light filtering through the fractured glass, creating an ethereal glow that belied the darkness lurking within. As she navigated the vast empty sanctuary, her senses strained against an invisible burden. The walls seemed to lean in towards her, eager to share their secrets. Each step raised a cacophony of echoes that pinballed around the cavernous space, and with every creak of the floorboards, she felt as though she might awaken something that had long lain dormant. She spotted an altar at the far end, where once prayers had flourished, now marked only by thin layers of dust and forgotten offerings. On it lay a weathered book, its pages yellowed and brittle, edges charred as if singed by flames echoing ancient wrath. As she reached for it, the air chilled around her, a sudden drop that sent a shiver crawling up her spine. Touching the book, she was filled with both trepidation and curiosity, a blend of emotions she couldn't quite separate. The cover felt oddly warm against her fingers, as if it pulsed with a hidden heartbeat. With each page she turned, the world outside faded into a dreamlike haze. The book contained strange drawings and bizarre accounts of rituals, frenzied gatherings beneath a blood moon, desperate pleas, and shadowy figures that danced among the flickering flame of lanterns. The text was fragmented, disjointed, but a singular phrase whispered in her mind like a lucid mantra. "They return on the night of the harvest moon." It echoed within her, thrumming with a sinister promise that felt both intoxicating and horrifying. Oblivious to the time slipping past, she continued to read until an unnerving hollow sound reverberated behind her, the unmistakable click of the heavy doors swinging shut. Panic surged as she turned, the dim light retreating to corners tinged with foreboding shadows. The oppressive silence settled back in, closing in like a squeezing vice. She was trapped, all significance of safety outside gone, replaced with a sensation that something was lurking, watching her every move, waiting for her to slip further into its embrace. Without thinking, Evelyn scribbled what she could remember into her notebook, the familiar motion anchoring her in reality for a fleeting moment. But another noise shattered her focus, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls around her. Heart pounding, she darted towards the door, hands yanking at the heavy latch that refused to give. Desperation clawed at her, and she threw herself against the solid wood, dropping her notebook in the process. The growl intensified, layered, with 1,000 whispers that echoed her name. In a frenzy, she retreated deeper into the church, stumbling into darkened hallways where shadows twisted like serpents, coiling at her feet. The unsettling sensation of being pursued was tangible, as if the darkness had formed a sentient will bent on consuming her. Cold sweat dripped down her spine as she reached a tattered room filled with decaying pews, the air rancid with mildew, and something more sinister, something that pressed against her consciousness like a weight bearing down on her soul. As she crouched behind a rotting pillar, the whispers continued, melding into a chorus of deranged urgency. "The moon will rise. They will come to claim. Join us." Each syllable was sharpened with an otherworldly edge, and the fear consuming her transformed into something unrecognizable, an alien blend of terror and allure. She felt a part of herself draw closer to the darkness, as if a thread connecting her to this otherworldly force was being woven tighter with each pulse of the ominous energy around her. Just as the whispers began to crescendo, the ground beneath her buckled, cracking open like an eager maw. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to sprint back towards the main hall, adrenaline erupting through her veins as she desperately sought escape. Yet every doorway seemed to shift, contorting in grotesque fashion, and she stumbled into the altar room once again, completely disoriented. The shadows thickened, forming dark silhouettes that elongated towards her, and the once far-off growl morphed into a cacophony of feral howls. In her final grasp for sanity, Evelyn dove for her notebook, splayed open where she had left it. Frantically, she flipped through the pages, searching for answers, for a way to unearth herself from this nightmare. But the drawings had transformed, twisted into grotesque renderings of herself ensnared by the very darkness she fled from. Panic unfurled in her chest. A deep realization washed over her as she beheld her reflection captured in those pages. Hollow eyes, a twisted smile, a version of herself that felt foreign. She understood then. The church was alive, its hunger insatiable, and it demanded a sacrifice. Evelyn's heart raced not for flight, but for a frenzied acceptance as shadows twisted around her, weaving a binding tapestry of whispers that swallowed her screams. The oppressive embrace of the church surrounded her, every crevice filling with laughter that echoed into eternity. Beneath the blood moon outside where the city lay forgotten, her essence splintered and vanished into the chasms of the church, leaving behind only the echoes of confusion and despair. And as the moon hung in finality, a new voice joined the choir of the damned, whispering her name into the layers of endless darkness, a final note blending seamlessly into the ever-thickening shadows. Story 3. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the abandoned amusement park, whistling past cracked mirrors and peeling paint. A thick blanket of fog enveloped the carnival grounds, clinging to the rusted Ferris wheel, long since forgotten, as it loomed like a ghostly sentinel. Alex had come to this forsaken place seeking nothing more than a thrill, a dare instigated by his friends, whose laughter faded the moment he stepped through the iron gates. The air was heavy with decay, a scent that clawed at his throat, urging him to turn back. Yet curiosity mingled with bravado, driving him deeper into the twisted heart of the park. The shadows moved unnaturally against the mist, casting long, sinewy forms that seemed to twist and writhe at the corners of his vision. As he wandered past the dilapidated booths, remnants of bright colors now leached into muted grays, Alex felt an involuntary shiver ripple down his spine. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a simple message from his friends. "How's it going? In there? You're not scared, are you?" He scoffed at the screen, but the echo of his own laughter felt hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence hanging like a shroud. Inside a derelict funhouse, mirrors leaned at odd angles, reflecting fragmented images of who he was, turning his vibrant confidence into something distorted and grotesque. Shadows danced along the walls, playing tricks on his mind, and an uneasy sensation slithered down his neck as if unseen eyes were tracking his every move. With each tentative step, he became aware of the silence around him. A silence too deep, too oppressive. The unnerving stillness made the slightest squeak of wood beneath his feet seem like a thunderclap in the cavernous emptiness. As he turned a corner, an unlit exit sign flickered to life with a dull hum, teasing him with the promise of escape. Peering through the grimy glass, he thought he saw something dart past, a blur of color too swift to be real. Shaking his head to dispel the illusion and pressing on, he found himself drawn toward the old carousel. Once vibrant with painted horses, it now stood dulled, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. Memories of laughter seemed to echo faintly, yet what followed felt like whispers laced with malice. Just as he stepped closer, a sharp chill enveloped him. The horses began to sway as if moved by unseen hands. The music box embedded within the carousel creaked to life, playing a haunting melody that pulled at the strings of his mind. The notes twisted into something sinister, drumming up a childhood fear of the dark, a fear he thought he had outgrown. Suddenly his phone buzzed once again, but a wave of dread washed over him as he flicked it open. A new message from a number he didn't recognize. "Get out before it sees you." Heart pounding, he turned on his heel, battling the rising panic. The corridors of rust and decay warped into an unfamiliar maze. The laughter of his friends echoed in his ears, mocking him for wandering alone. The shadows stretched, elongating around him as if the very structures of the park had become living entities, intent on ensnaring him. Desperately, he stumbled back through the funhouse. Mirrors now reflected not just his visage but warped images of himself contorted into agonized faces, eyes wide with terror and mouths silently screaming. A cold breeze swept through, carrying the sweet, sickly scent of something rotting, and with it, a phantom voice, soft yet insistent, whispered from the shadows, promising him freedom in exchange for surrender. He staggered blindly, bumping into walls that felt almost warm, pulsating beneath his touch as if the park itself were alive and breathing. He choked back bile, neglecting the urge to scream as the walls seemed to close in, curling around him, in a tighter embrace. Bursting through a door, he found himself on the carousel once more, now spinning as if alive with grotesque energy. Horses that once appeared forlorn were now imbued with a lurking threat, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. He was entrapped, caught in a trance-like state as if threads of fate were weaving around him, binding him to the sinister history of the park. A horrifying revelation struck him. He wasn't the first here. They were lost too. In the center of the carousel, he felt an unbearable heat rising, a suction pulling at his very essence. The joyful laughter transformed into unintelligible cries, desperately pleading, begging him not to join them. Fueled by survival instinct, he lunged toward the exit, which blurred on the edge of the mist, but he was not fast enough. The darkness enveloped him, the weight of countless spirits pulling him down, wrapping around him in a cocoon of despair. Just as he thought he had lost himself to the void, a sudden crack echoed through the atmosphere, and the world warped into static. Suddenly he was back outside the park gates, gasping for air, heart racing, anchored once more to reality. He turned, the anticipation clawing at his throat, only to find the entrance was sealed tightly behind him as if it had never been there. Yet something unexplainable beckoned him back. Beyond the anemic light of the moon, he could still hear the children laughing, still feel the alluring pull of lost souls trapped within. Days turned into weeks. His friends teased him about that, Night convinced he had been the fool for entering. But in quiet moments, whispers begged for acknowledgement, clawing at the corners of his sanity, threatening to drown him. The city felt dreary and mundane, the sky too bright and clean as shadows loomed behind him just out of sight, always lurking. Late at night, the carousel started to invade his dreams. Faces twisted into grotesque smiles, rides that promised eternal joy but hid dread beneath their surface. As the weeks waned, so did his grip on reality. More messages arrived from unknown numbers, taunting and beckoning. The barrier between the park and his world thinned, their laughter brushing against his ears like wind beneath his skin. He found himself standing at the gates again, no longer afraid, just drawn by a familiarity that felt unavoidable. With shaking hands, he pushed the rusted gates open. The carnival awaited, filled with echoes of joy that belied the darkness consuming him. He understood then that he had escaped once, but it wasn't survival he craved. No, it was the dance of fleeting life and unbridled darkness, each moment intertwined with the other, until he was no longer the hero of his story, but the very fear that lay waiting in the shadows. The carousel began to spin, and he stepped forward, into the fog. becoming one with the whispers, lost but finally at home. Story 4. Underneath the lurid glow of a flickering streetlight, Lila waited, holding her breath against the cold, metallic taste of fear that gnawed at her tongue. She hadn't planned to be out this late, but when the sun dipped low, it revealed shadows that pulsed with the weight of unspeakable things. The urban neighborhood was long abandoned, its buildings leaning like tired giants, whispering secrets caught in disintegrating walls. As Lila stood there, the wind curled around her ankles, tugging at her too thin jacket and pulling her deeper into the mire of unease that blanketed the night. Having moved into her grandmother's dilapidated house just weeks ago, Lila had hoped to escape her troubled past, desperately yearning for a fresh start. Instead, every crack in the flooring and creak of the rafters mournfully replayed memories she wished to bury. Her parents' tragic end in a car crash that haunted her dreams. It had been a year since she buried them, but every day felt like slipping further into darkness. The house, with its peeling wallpaper and sagging roof, felt more like a mausoleum than a refuge. On her first night in, the walls had whispered her name, a soft yet insistent call that sent ripples of dread coursing through her veins. She had dismissed it as the settling of the old structure, chalking up the sensation to the unfamiliarity of her surroundings. Yet now, standing in the vacant street, Lila felt a gnawing pull toward the ruins of what once was. A mirage of voices echoed softly, beckoning her closer. A siren's call that promised solace but exuded malice. Compelled by an unseen force, she stepped forward, the asphalt crunching beneath her worn shoes. The further she walked, the more the air shifted, dense with the lingering scent of decay, mingling with the sweet aroma of rotten fruit. Her heart raced as she approached a once grand old hotel, its windows shattered and ivy clinging desperately to the exterior. It felt like a mouth grinning at her from the darkness, and an overwhelming sense of abandonment poured over her, seeping into her bones like winter's chill. Inside, the atmosphere changed dramatically. It was heavy and oppressive, the air thick, with dust that danced like ghostly specters under the dim light. The floorboards sighed under her weight, each creak gliding like a hidden whisper brushing against her ear. As Lila stepped further into the dank corridor, her fingers brushed against the walls, cold and clammy, sending a shiver up her spine. She could almost hear the faint echoes of laughter, conversations frozen in time, like the last breath held in anticipation. At the end of the hall, a door stood ajar, splintered and maniacal. Lila felt an urge to slip inside, though dread gnawed at her heart. Taking one deliberate step, she crossed the threshold, revealing a grand lobby frozen in decay. A chandelier hung precariously above her head, caked in dust, its once proud crystals dulled by years of neglect. Yet in that ghostly opulence something stirred, a vibration that thrummed in the silence, like a pot about to boil over. Then she saw it, a figure silhouetted against the shattered glass of the entrance. The shape hovered, undulating like mist with shadows spilling from its form, whispering secrets Lila could almost decipher. The figure turned, and what she thought was a shadow morphed into an eye, cold and knowing, pinning her in place with a stare that delved deep into her soul. It felt as though the figure could sense her miseries, recognizing the darkness she carried within her. As the eye drew closer, thoughts of her parents flickered in Lila's mind, now twisted with guilt and sorrow. The ethereal presence seemed to draw strength from her turmoil, feeding off her anguish like a parasite. It spoke to her in screams muffled by her own terror, yet beneath the layers of dread lay a familiar tone that twisted her insides into knots, a long-lost lullaby her mother used to sing. With a sudden burst of instinct, Lila turned to flee, but The corridor morphed, elongating and twisting, mocking her with its impossible design. The walls pulsated, echoing her shame, her pain, her abandonment. She stumbled through a door that led her not outside but into an eerie parlor, preserved in a tableau of dust and despair. Glassy eyes stared from faded portraits. Her family, tainted with anguish, their expressions forever locked in torment. Driven by a primal urge, she grasped at the wall for balance but found only the slickness of something wet. Her fingers coming away stained crimson. Shards of memory collided within her mind. She had seen this room in dreams, the specters lurking in the periphery, always watching, always waiting. But now they had coalesced into something maddeningly real. Lila feared she was losing her mind. As the room spun, her pulse thrumming louder, drowning her in darkness, the sensations rushed at her. Frigid air biting her skin, the weight of eyes glaring from corners unknown, and the dust-soaked nostalgia saturating her lungs. Panic surged, her breath hitched, and she stumbled backwards, colliding with an unseen force, a tangible weight that nearly knocked the air from her lungs. As her vision flickered, shadows shifted like looming phantoms. They enveloped her in an eerie embrace, whispering secrets in a voice that coiled, tightening around her heart. Her body felt weighed down by despair, and instinct urged her to scream, yet all she could manage was a strangled gasp. Within the folds of darkness, the convoluted memories of her past crashed violently into her present, dragging her toward a revelation she scarcely wanted to face. "Help me," she mouthed silently, hoping for a savior in this waking nightmare. But the only answer was the creeping cold that pressed against her skin. Lila realized too late that this place mattered to her, rooted in her lineage, marked by the traumas echoing in the walls. They weren't just memories. They were a part of her, fierce and alive, awakening in the night to consume her every thought. In that moment of realization, she felt a pulse deep within the floor beneath her, a heartbeat bridging the past to the present. As the shadows surged closer, Lila's panic transformed into a chilling understanding. She wasn't meant to escape. The hotel was hungry for her, and the souls trapped within its sinister embrace craved her acceptance, nourished by each regret and unspoken sorrow. With a final glimpse of the figure, its skin, an abyss dark as despair, Lila surrendered to the overwhelming tide of dread. It cradled her, an entity of anguish, merging their souls as the laughter of her family echoed in a dissonant, ghastly harmony. And in that haunting cacophony, Lila vanished, not into the void but into the woven tapestry of countless fates, each marked by a sorrow that would beckon another soul to join their choir of despair. Outside, dawn broke over the city, a golden sliver illuminating the remains of the once grand hotel. The world moved on, blissfully unaware as the echoes of Lila's presence faded into the whispers of the wind. But those who dared to tread in the silence of the night would feel a peculiar weight beneath the shadows, the lament of lost souls, lurking in the depths of memory, forever echoing the names of those who once sought solace but found only oblivion.